A small intro, welcome to Back to School with Growth's SEO team. I'm Amy, an SEO account exec, and I'm also joined with James, who's also an SEO account exec.
Hi guys.
We both joined in January this year and started directly in SEO. We chose to do a talk on Google updates because as SEOs, we know how important they are for a site's organic traffic, but also we first-handedly seen the impact it's had on our clients, both positive and negatively. And as another note, we're actually going to be doing a Q&A at the end. So if you have any questions, feel free to pop them in the chat. If it's related to Google updates or any general SEO questions, please feel free to add. We'll be joined with Paige, our head of SEO, as well as Alice, our senior SEO account manager. So yeah, we'll probably kick off now.
Okay, so in terms of an agenda for today's session, we're going to be looking at the Google updates that occurred in 2021, starting from February. But first, we're going to look at what we would define as a Google update, or rather what we mean by a Google update, why a Google update is important, and how to keep up with Google updates. So as a quick tour, just to start off, in February, we saw the mobile first indexing update, as well as passage ranking. And then in February, March, we saw a drop in featured snippets, and which then saw a recovery in March. In April, we saw the Google product review introduced. And then in May, Google announced their new NLP tool, Google Mum. In June, we saw 3 updates. We saw the Broadc algorithm update, the page experience update, and the link spam update. And then finally in August, we saw the Google title rewrite update. Just as a note, from about May, June, Google did change their system to like a learning to rank system. So we are likely to see a lot more updates following as well, but this is why there's so many in such a small space of time. Okay, so what do we mean by Google update? So a Google update is the term used to describe a change affecting how rankings are calculated by the search engine Google. So what this effectively means is any change that Google uses to retrieve data from a web page and display or deliver relevant results. So Google changes its search algorithm around 500 to 600 times a year. Most of these are going to go unannounced, but sometimes they do announce the larger ones. And these updates vary from core updates and more targeted general updates. So we'll go into the difference a bit more later as well.
So now we know what a Google update is. What is the aim of a Google update? Well, the general aim is to make sure that Google is always improving the relevancy and quality of the search results. Secondly, it's about Google wanting to surface the most accurate and secure pages for its users. And lastly, presenting relevant and authoritative content to searchers. So what's the big deal and why should we care? Firstly, knowing what sort of updates have taken place helps site owners and SEOs to stay in line with best practices. This will be rewarded by Google and this will reflect some ranking improvements. Secondly, having an understanding of any shifts in your site's organic performance will help because then you can link it back to an update. Whereas if you're, so for example, if you're rewarded by an update, you would notice a rise in organic rankings, whereas if you're penalized by an update, you'd notice a drop in organic rankings. So it's a great way to understand any performance shifts. So an important note is don't always wait for Google to officially announce when an update has happened. Instead, regularly check your site's organic traffic, use analytic platforms such as GA, monitor the search rankings for your target keywords, look out for any steep drops or rises. It's also really important to stay up to date with SEO community blogs, so places like SEO Roundtable are really useful. This is particularly important because this gives you an insight of what industries are being impacted the most before it's been officially announced by Google, so you can get an idea if you will be impacted.
Okay, so to kick off, in February, we saw the first update, which is the passage ranking update. So what passage ranking means is that Google changed the way that they use passages or sections or snippets of page content to rank different search results. So what this meant for Google is that they could effectively look at a page of content and understand that there were multiple topics being discussed on there, whereas previously SEOs would have to optimize specific pages for specific topics. So the impact of this is that it impacted around 7% of all search queries once rolled out globally. Initially, it was just rolled out in the US on English language queries. However, in the months following it, spread globally. Google initially described it as passage indexing, but then replaced it with passage ranking, as this was a more accurate description of what the update entailed. And it was developed off the back of BERT, which is Google's natural language processing tool. We'll go into this in a bit more detail later, but effectively, Google basically had to understand the content in order to rank it. So in terms of checks and recovery tips, it's always important to monitor your rankings for long tail keywords, especially as the passage ranking update saw a larger impact to pages that had long form content. Google actually gave no official guidance on how to optimize for passage ranking. However, you should look to optimize your content in the usual way that Google will favor, so creating unique content and using structure to make sure Google can understand your content well, and using things like schema can also mean that you can appear for SERP features and effectively at the top of the SERP. Also, using tracking tools like SEMrush, Ahrefs, and Google Keyword Planner mean you can target longer tail keywords, especially you can steal ones from competitors or look at specific keywords that you can target SERP features with.
Next up, in March, we had mobile first indexing. So in a nutshell, this means that Google is now using the mobile version of the site's content for indexing and ranking purposes. Google has stated that the goal of this was to provide an identical experience on both mobile and desktop for the user. Mobile first indexing was initially introduced as an answer to the widespread problem of more and more people using their mobiles to browse. However, the problem Google faced was that the mobile and desktop versions of a site's page were different in content, so this created a mismatch in rankings. Some of you may be thinking, didn't this update already happen? Well, it sort of did. Originally, Google announced plans to officially move all sites to mobile first indexing in September 2020. However, they pushed it back because of COVID. But it is worth noting, Google has actually already moved 70% of sites over to mobile first indexing last September. So if you're concerned if you've been impacted by this update, it's worth checking organic data around September 2020 as well as March 2021. Google have also said themselves, the sites which have been most impacted by this update is ones that purposely serve less content on their mobile version of a page. You will likely have seen a drop in organic traffic. So if you think your site may have been impacted by the update, here are some tips to aid recovery, as well as some general checks to now make since this update has gone live. First, does Google consider your URL to be mobile friendly? You can check this through Google Search Console. You can check things such as the user friendliness on mobile devices. For example, is the content wider than the screen, or are clickable elements too close together? Second, ensure to use a responsive web design. And third, use identical content on every device, as we touched on, but identical content includes meta tags, structured data, titles, descriptions, videos, and links. And lastly, and arguably most importantly, optimize mobile page load time. We already recognize that page speed is a ranking factor for Google, so it's always worth working on improving speed.
Okay, cool. So the next update we are talking about is featured snippets drop and recovery. So around February 18th, SEOs noticed that there was a historic low of featured snippets. So first, let's dive into what is a featured snippet. So a featured snippet is the selected search result that sits just above organic results and just under paid results. These results feature the relevant page content from the actual web page, as well as a page URL. You can see in the examples, do lizards make bad pets? they've pulled the page content from the Daily Mail and it sits at the top of the SERP. And the same for the corresponding query, do lizards make good pets? So what happened was that SEOs noticed the historic low on February 18th. This spanned multiple industries from health, jobs, and education as well. SEMrush did a study on this and found that by March, most results on mobile had seen a full recovery, with some increases in selected industries, and desktop followed shortly afterwards. They also noticed that the UK, Australia, and the US were the most impacted countries. So in the example here, so this is one of our clients in the blue line. We can see that from the red line, which is around February 18th, we can see that they saw quite a large fluctuation. So they didn't fare as badly as their competitor, which is shown in the black line just beneath. Sorry, I should have said this graph shows the number of featured snippets that have been triggered daily. So the black line was their competitor, and they show a much more pronounced drop from the 18th till March. So Google didn't give an official explanation for this. Instead, Mueller just commented that featured snippets are quite a volatile search result. So Google basically keeps featured snippets quite volatile in order to make sure that they're targeting the right queries with featured snippets. And this also stops SEOs from devaluing the search result with manipulative tactics. So in terms of checks and recovery, it's important to use tracking tools to measure your featured snippets results. Tools including SEMrush and Myposio are really useful here. They can report on the number of snippets triggered daily. And it's also important to optimize your page content for featured snippets. So look at what featured snippets your competitors have, and using long tail keywords in your headers to break up page content means Google can better understand your content and what topics you're talking about.
Next up, we have the product review update, which happened in April. So Google launched this update with the goal of ranking well-researched and insightful content over brief product summaries. With this update, Google is aiming to prioritize product reviews written by experts or enthusiasts who know the topic really well. Google has stated that this has been done in order to show the most useful information and helpful information to its users, and to better reward such content through ranking improvements. So what type of sites should be concerned with this update? Sites that publish predominantly product reviews should carefully check their organic traffic and look for anything out of the ordinary from April the 8th. Arguably, affiliate sites might be the ones most impacted here. But if your site has any pages which has review content, it's worth taking a look at those pages specifically and if there's been any ranking fluctuations there. As we can see on the slide, here are two examples of two different review sites. The bottom one was positively impacted by the update, whereas the top one was negatively impacted. So if your site has been impacted, try to evaluate your review content objectively and ask yourself if the content is achieving the following elements. First, does your content express expert knowledge on the topic? Two, is the content unique? Is it going beyond what the manufacturer provides? Third, are you comparing your content to competitors as well as previous models? And lastly, are you actually helping consumers make a wise purchasing decision rather than having marketing language? It's actually helping make a wise decision.
Okay, cool. So in May, Google announced their exciting development to natural language processing called MUM. So what MUM stands for is Multitask Unified Model. And this basically means that MUM is Google's natural language processing technology, which basically helps it to understand complex search queries better. So natural language processing is where Google applies computerized techniques to understand and analyze and synthesize natural language and speech. So this basically helps Google to understand language more like a human would. So MUM was developed off the back of BERT, which was announced back in October 2019, and it was Google's previous NLP tool. BERT stands for Bidirectional Encoder Representations and Transformers, which is basically that Google could analyze language both ways in order to fully understand its nuances and complexities. And this had a massive impact on the search landscape because it impacted over 10% of all searches. And it helped Google to understand ambiguous, polysemous, and synonymous language. So a cool example of this was examined by Chris Berkeley in his article, Why Beyonce is the Queen of SEO. This is a really interesting article if you have time to read it. But basically, it's about how Beyonce's album Lemonade completely changed the search landscape for the term lemonade. Previously, where it used to be recipes for lemonade or a definition of what lemonade is, it then changed in June 2016 after the album's release to reviews of the album and news surrounding the album. So this just shows how Google was able to understand changes in language. So a deeper dive into MUM. So MUM allows Google to understand the complex user search queries. Google used this example, which is, I've hiked Mount Adams and now want to hike Mount Fuji next fall. What should I do differently to prepare? So the reason why this is a complex search query is because it's effectively multiple queries in one. The user's asking to compare Mount Adams and Mount Fuji in a lot of different respects. And this is where MUM is multitask. So MUM can look at different pools of information surrounding a query and bring information about temperature, elevation, gear, exercises to prepare, and put it into one answer so that a user doesn't have to do separate searches. It's multilingual, so MUM can understand over 75 languages and pull the most relevant result, even if it's not in the language that the user used. And it's multimodal in that MUM can get information from text, images, and later on audio and video. So MUM's been applied in 3 different examples so far. It's an ongoing update, so we're still going to be seeing more developments in the year following. So it was applied to COVID-19 vaccine research. So MUM helped to identify over 800 vaccination keywords, where it would have taken a human hours, and this allows Google to provide the most accurate and trustworthy information regarding COVID. Google Lens app. So MUM is coming to the Google Visual Search app in 2022, and this app basically is where users can take pictures and submit, ask questions. So it's a visual search app. So MUM is behind the scenes in combining text here with images. And in a Google search redesign. So Google MUM is behind the scenes of creating a more intuitive search with 3 new topics, which are things to know, where Google will introduce relevant and frequent user paths that relating to a topic. So for example, acrylic paints, Google will introduce canvases for acrylic painting or colors for acrylic painting. The next feature is topic zoom, where users can jump in or out of a topic, make it more broad, or go into more subtopics, which are more granular, and visual exploration, which is where this is for ideas and inspiration queries, and Google will introduce visual search results to provide a better result. So in terms of preparation for MUM, it's not fully rolled out, but we're likely to see continuous impact over the coming months in developing new tools and improving existing ones. As it's a natural language processing tool, this allows Google to understand complex queries, so it could be beneficial to target more long-tail keywords in your content. And finally, using page schema to optimize for results types, because this will always help Google to understand what your content is about. Oh, sorry. So next we have the Broadc update, which happened in June. So the difference between a core update and a general update, such as passage ranking or mobile first indexing, is that the core update is not targeted. It's more that Google is updating that algorithm to refresh how they would rank web pages. So it's like a review of their assessment process. Google used the example of saying, if you were creating a list of your favorite movies, you'd want to refresh it either like annually or monthly and review how you're deciding which movies to rank. So a core update takes place a few times a year. The last one was in December 2020. And this one occurred in two halves, or two parts rather. So the first one was from June 2nd to June 12th, and the second followed on July 2nd. This was because the update was quite a large one, so Google couldn't fit all the updates in the June update, so split it out later in July. So in terms of checks and recovery tips for Broadc updates, it's hard to tell if you've been impacted, but largely it's to do with any increases or drops in traffic or positions. So if you're affected, it's important to kind of look at these questions to assess why. Is the quality of your content high? Is it unique and helpful? And are you using page titles, headers, and is it descriptive and helpful? Also, how trustworthy is your site? Does your site contain any errors? And is the content trustworthy? Does your site look good on mobile and desktop? And are your ads giving a bad user experience? And how does your site compare to competitors?
Next up, we have the link spam update, which happened in both June and July. So before we actually dive into this update, it's important to remind ourselves the power of backlinks, as this ties into the link spam update. So first off, we know that backlinks, like the bread and butter of SEO, they're essentially a digital like or an academic citation. They're providing trust to your website, so we always want to acquire as many backlinks as we can. However, the problem is not all backlinks are good links. We can get spammy backlinks, which can be really damaging for your organic traffic. So this brings us on to the link spam update. What exactly is it? Well, this update refers to Google getting much better at spotting these spammy and unnatural links. With this update, Google is showcasing their newest effort in fighting poor quality content from ranking highly in the search page. It's important to flag two different updates happened here. So we had the first one on June the 23rd and the second on July 26th. Both were specific link spam updates, they just happened within 2 months. Therefore, if you want to see if you've been impacted, look at your organic traffic around these dates. Interestingly, with this link spam update, Google have actually said themselves that they put an emphasis on how sites should handle links where an exchange of value is involved. So, for example, guest links, sponsored links, all these sort of things. So where to start if you think you've been impacted? First of all, make sure your site's links are natural and in accordance with Google guidelines. Ensure your affiliate links are properly tagged up. And lastly, and arguably most importantly, it's always a good idea to carry out a backlink audit. Look for any signs of any sudden uplift in referring domains or backlinks. And this is unrelated to PR activity because this could indicate spam. So here are some client examples where we've seen 2 of our clients been impacted by this update, both positively and negatively. So the graph refers to organic traffic by non-brand query, so any keyword which doesn't include the brand's name. With site 1, you can see a downward dip after June the 23rd, which indicates the site was negatively impacted. So how did we recover from this? We were pretty confident that they had been impacted because of the clear drop. So we did a backlink investigation and then found that they were being linked to from lots of spammy links, which wasn't their fault, they were just a victim of it. So we carried out a backlink cleanup, and as a result, we're now starting to see clicks stabilize and actually eventually improve. It's just worth noting, if you're ever doing backlink cleanups, a disavow file is a last resort, but it's good if it is obvious spam. With site 2, you can actually see that they were rewarded by this update, their organic traffic improved, and we actually think this is because we carried out a backlink audit at the end of last year. So we did a backlink cleanup and the site was essentially clean and ready for the update. So as a result, they were rewarded, and that's clear with the graph. So I guess the biggest takeaway of this is just to monitor your backlink and referring domains profile regularly and really look out for any sudden uplifts.
Okay, cool. So in June, we also saw the page experience update. So what is page experience? Page experience is where Google assesses several signals that would create the optimal browsing user experience. So these signals are core web vitals, which we'll go into in a second, but they form the technical baseline of your site's health. Is your page mobile friendly? So a page must be compatible on mobile devices, given that most users use mobile nowadays. Safe browsing, any security issues that are on a web page are going to disqualify you from achieving a good status for your URL. And HTTPS, so a page should be served over a HTTPS protocol rather than a HTTP. This is for the security of the user. And ad experience as well. Page ads must not be interruptive or disturbing because this can impact user experience. So a little refresher into Core Web Vitals. Core Web Vitals look at loading, interactivity, and visual stability of your page. So first we have LCP, which stands for largest contentful paint. This is the amount of time it takes for your page to load the main piece of content. We can see that a good URL would have an LCP of under 2.5 seconds, and a poor URL would have one over 4 seconds. We then have first input delay, which looks at interactivity. So this is how long it takes your page to respond to a user interaction. So this includes like a click or a scroll. A good URL will see under 100 milliseconds of first input delay, whereas a poor URL is over 300 milliseconds. The last one is cumulative layout shift, or CLS. This looks at visual stability, so how much unexpected layout shift will occur while a page is loading. A good example of this is if you're looking to click on a banner or a link and it suddenly moves and you're headed to the wrong page. It's really annoying. So a good URL will have under 0.1 of CLS, and a poor URL will have over 0.25 CLS. So Google provides loads of tools that are really useful to look at your page experience. The first one, probably the one that I use the most, is Google Search Console. So Google Search Console provides a page experience report, which uses field data and identifies groups of URLs which suffer from the same speed problems or similar speed problems. So it's really easy to identify large groups of URLs that you can fix. We then have Lighthouse. Lighthouse is an automated web auditing tool used to investigate user experience. Lighthouse also uses field data. Field data means that it's real world data. So it's collected from real experience. The next tool is PageSpeed Insights. So it's a Google tool is used to measure website speed. We also use this, and it's linked to from Google Search Console, which is really useful. And this uses lab and field data, so it can give you a really in-depth sort of diagnosis of any SEO problems that your site has, and also the Google Chrome UX report, which provides a measurement of page experience for real-world users. So in terms of checks and recovery from the page experience update, Google recognizes that page experience was a tiebreaker, and so it wouldn't override content as a ranking factor. So this is reassuring, as if you've got good content, then you should still see good rankings. Page experience may impact it slightly. It's important though to check for any significant drops that occurred between June and August when the page experience was rolling out. They did roll it out quite gradually so that it would mitigate any drastic drops, but you still may see an impact. It's useful to check any significant drops against the Core Web Vitals report and the page experience report, which will show you your page experience over time or your Core Web Vitals over time. Do the drops coincide with any impact on your Core Web Vitals or page experience? And you can identify groups of pages that require any attention with the page experience report. And this links directly to PageSpeed Insights, where you can find solutions and any areas of opportunity.
So in August, we had the title Rewrite Update. This is the last update we'll be discussing of what happened in 2021. I'm sure a lot of people watching would have noticed this update because it's happened to quite a lot of sites. So it refers to Google now not simply using the tag HTML tag to generate titles in the SERP, but rather taking the page as H1. Google have said the goal of replacing titles is to enhance the relevancy for searches. They've stated that they will replace the page's title in cases where they believe the title is not describing the page as well as it could. The update rolled out on August 16th. With this update, we recommend particularly taking a look at your click-through rate rather than organic traffic as a whole. If you've noticed a drop or even rise in your CTR since August 16th, check the title Google is serving in the search page, and if it's different from the title tag, this is probably most worth looking at for your highest performing pages. So for meta title tags, try to avoid half-empty ones now. For example, titles that just display the site's name. Secondly, avoid inaccurate titles. Sometimes title tags do not actually accurately reflect what a page is about. And also now consider your H1 as the title in the search. So are you happy for your H1 to be presented in Google search? Because it's likely that Google could now use that instead.
Okay, so that is basically all the updates that happened from February till date. So we're now going to look at some exciting upcoming updates. So one of them is big moments. So this is where Google is reporting breaking news in real time. So Google want to replace where users would usually go to Facebook or Twitter to find out what's happening. Google want to be the hub for all the breaking news. So this kind of technology relies on machine learning capabilities that were added back in 2018 to Google News. Also, Google is introducing what they call eco-friendly filters as part of a plan for green initiatives. So users can find out the carbon emissions for their flights. They can see they're served sustainable alternative appliances when they're shopping, especially for energy-intensive appliances like, say, a dishwasher or a washing machine. And they can also get information on the most fuel-efficient routes, but that's to be rolled out in 2022. And we're also seeing Google developing what they call a more persistent search, where their search page is going to appear for longer and be more accessible for users. So two new features are involved in this update: Journeys, which sees previous searches grouped into archives for users to revisit. So this is going to help a lot with users that are researching. And side panel search, where search results are going to remain visible while on the web page. We can see that in the GIF here. The side panel pops up, and you can see all the competing search pages that are going to come up. So you may see increased competition from this.
Another update to look out for includes Google's ability to start indexing Instagram and TikTok videos. So there's apparently a rumored deal between Google, Instagram, and TikTok. This deal sounds like the one between Google and Twitter. So in 2015, Google was granted access to index tweet data. But this update could be really exciting because this would mean that there'd be a higher search volume on Google. It would mean Google search has become a place for articles and videos. So this will lead to an overall increase in search volume, like I said, and more searches on Google means more opportunities for sites to get found. Secondly, there has also been recent talks of continuous scrolling rolling out in the UK. This update actually went live in the US last week. This means Google will automatically populate more results when users scroll to the bottom of the page. If this update does happen in the UK, it's pretty exciting, as the change could mean websites ranking on page 2 predominantly would have more organic traffic going there, as users are more likely to be on that page now, as it's not disrupting the user experience that's already shown to them. So yeah, it will be interesting to see the results from the US, and yeah. So to conclude the session, it's impossible to exactly predict when Google is going to roll out an update. We can have a rough idea, like we mentioned earlier, if we're keeping up with SEO industry blog pages, but we'll never fully know when it's going to happen. So the only way you can truly prepare your site for any type of update is ensuring your site is already adhering to Google's core guidelines. So first, aiming to always create high quality, user-friendly content. No matter how the algorithm changes or a specific industry it impacts, the best way to survive is to do this. And lastly, adhering to the EAC guidelines, expertise, authoritativeness, and trustworthiness. Google rewards sites that achieve this through rankings, so it's a factor you should always strive to achieve. Yeah, well, thank you for listening.